and I think it's over to Ron for the Introduction to the Future Teacher webinar Reflected series.
Thanks, Lynn. Welcome, everybody. I'll put the link to our main resource, which is the same link you would have followed to register for this session, I think. But I'll share my screen just very quickly and remind everybody that we're running these webinars under the banner of Reflected, and that's because in previous years we had the first run-in of all the topics, and then the second was reactivated. And for this third run-in of all the topics, it's reflected. So the idea is more guest speakers, more case studies, more reflective experience, and a kind of general maturity compared perhaps with the first year of running all the topics. And when I mention all the topics, there are 19 in total, but there's a lot of overlap between some of these. So if you're not familiar with this resource and the project, you'll find it's been like 4 or 5 years now, if not longer, of sessions and recordings and resources. And today's session, there's the registration form. We leave that live until the session is finished because we get some people signing up late. And then you'll find this little panel at the top, which is the welcome, about us, the host of the session, and then a session for each of our, or a panel for each of our guest speakers with some links to their social media profiles, and also, if provided, then a link to their presentation that you're going to see shortly. Further down, you'll find the resource that we created in the first 2 run-ins of the topic, and then also the recordings from those previous run-ins of the topic. So lots of resources, lots to look through, and what we try to do is complement what's been covered previously, what's been covered today. So I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thanks, Ron. And also just to say that in this current webinar series, we're trying to make sure that we include the student voice to try and reflect on what has worked, and to make sure that we hear that directly from students where we can. And we'll hear from Ryan today from University of York. But most of you who signed up also told us what you want to get out of today's session. So no surprises that everyone wants to kind of learn some hints and tips, you know, about using social media and teaching and learning. But some people are also wanting to think about what kind of strategies are most effective. A reminder not to take digital skills for granted, not assuming that all the students in your groups know how to use the affordances of different tools. Some people want to find out, well, how do you choose which social media platform you're going to use to engage students with? And people want to kind of think about, well, how do you make sure you do some safeguarding? How do you make sure you think about privacy concerns that students might have, the university might have, and then how to kind of create that community of practice amongst students as well. So just some of the things that we're going to hopefully cover, not just in the presentations, but in our discussion. And the hot topic for discussion will be, have you moved to Mastodon? Do you intend to? And others will be like, what is Mastodon? So just generally about platforms. I think without further ado, unless my co-hosts can remind me that there's anything else I've forgotten, we can get on with the presentations. Yeah,
I think we're ready to go. Yeah.
Okay, so first up we have Mathilde Perron from University of York, senior lecturer in economics. She teaches lots of stuff to do with data analysis, econometrics, and health economics. And Ryan is one of the students. But Ryan is here as a student and as the kind of student mentor who was helping us to run the student engagement campaign with social media. So without further ado, over to you, Mathilde.
All right, thanks, Liliane. Hi, everyone. I'm Mathilde. I'm just going to share my presentation with you. That's it. You should be able to see that. Is that okay?
Yep.
Right. So thanks for having us today, Ryan and myself. So the project is about building community beyond the lab with social media. Just a quick sort of introduction around where's that coming from and what we try to achieve with that. So as Lillian said, I'm a lecturer in economics, and I've got the pleasure to teach 2 rather large core modules in a BSc in economics, and the one in first year, economic data analysis, and second year, econometrics. So these are 200 plus cohorts, and one of the learning objectives, an important one, is proficiency in computer skills. The first year module with Excel, and the second year module with Stata, which is a statistic software package that is used in academia, but also in the professional world. And one of the many consequences of COVID about 2 or 3 years ago now is that we moved from what was traditionally the computer lab sessions to work on these computer skills to asynchronous online activities, basically tutors, myself recording videos of going through the software, showing students how to do things, then they would do it in their own time. So we replace these labs by these basically pre-recorded videos, which has advantages, especially because labs are very costly to run. They're usually quite a scarce resource in universities. They're usually pretty small. So if you've got a cohort of 200, you're likely to do 7 or 8 sessions of those. They can feel a bit awkward as well. I mean, maybe, although Ryan didn't have the pleasure to experiment them, but it can feel a bit awkward. So, students kind of like these pre-recorded videos. However, we realized after the first year, so 2021, that we were missing some of the actual dynamics of labs, especially in terms of learning and social dynamics. Just the sort of, looking over your neighbor and just asking them how to do things, or having a sense of community of all doing the same sort of error, having the same error messages on Stata or whatever. And so I was trying to find ways of recreating that social and learning dynamics with these asynchronous online activities. And I've used most of the tools I could use from what university provided. So we've got a virtual learning environment, which is Blackboard. So you have discussion boards, and you could add more step-by-step resources, try to encourage students to ask questions in some form or another. But that was basically a fail. Nothing really happened there, and it doesn't look like students are really don't really like these tool sets. So the project was about using 2 things: using near peer mentors and social media to recreate that dynamic of computer lab sessions. So we wanted to basically expand the range of learning activities. We wanted to improve student engagement, build a bit of a sense of community, especially in the context of COVID. The last 2 years have been really difficult for students. And doing all that using what students are the most familiar with, and some of the tools they are already using, such as we can see Instagram, and we tried TikTok as well. It's fair to say that I'm not at all a social media user. I've never been, and the objective was really to sort of leave the initiative to students, and that project was really student-led with their own tools and their own ways to communicate. So my involvement, although I was helping the mentors thinking about what we wanted to do and how to create things, I had no input whatsoever in the content or the form of social media. And I think that's one of the questions about Lillian was talking about. If you take part in something that students have already used, you might kill it because it's not really cool if the lecturer is in the WhatsApp group or whatever. So I try to kind of stay out of it. So this is what we did. we recruited 4 what we call near peer support. So for the first year course, we had 2 second-year students, including Ryan, who's here, and for the second year course, 2 third-year students. We created specific channels, accounts in Instagram and TikTok with university addresses. So it wasn't the personal profile of the student. And over the 10 weeks of the term, in spring term last year, they created about 40 different posts, short form videos, little reminders, just talking to the camera and trying to send positive messages to the cohorts. And in terms of engagement, most of the videos had more than 500 views, a little bit of engagement around the posts and so on. You can have access to the, if you want to have a look at what the Instagram accounts look like, you can click on the links there. And the project was supported by the Royal Economic Society. Right, that's my introduction there, and I'll just leave now Ryan. Good. Leave Ryan present what the posts looked like.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I was a near peer mentor working on the Beyond the Land project. And I think one of the goals was to create a more personable mode of learning. And to do this, we used short form videos and posts on Instagram and TikTok. We walked students through Excel and starter operations. And the idea was to be as concise as possible. In the example here of if functions and nested if functions explained, I used the snappy style of a TikTok video to summarize lecture material. As you can see, we got very positive student feedback. One student stating that it was helpful to have bite-sized chunks of the most important information, and another one telling us that it gave a different perspective. So the content was distributed on TikTok and Instagram. Some students mentioned it would be convenient to see reminders on social media, as of course a lot of students use social media already. And one of the ways we decided to boost engagement was to use nudges and reminders. And this was to reach students who don't engage with in-person lectures. It was still around the time of COVID, so perhaps they couldn't attend due to COVID problems, or maybe they were just falling a little bit behind. So the informal videos were aimed to remind students of upcoming assessments. It informed them of the due dates and gave some context and background to the projects too. Also, the checklist posts acted as a gentle nudge. And I think this was successful. I think that the video of the formative assessments, letting students know that there was an upcoming project that they needed to do, were probably the ones that were viewed the most out of the videos. So after the pandemic, we believed it was imperative to build a sense of community around the 2 modules, Excel and starter modules. And we did this using a friendly and welcoming tone. We introduced ourselves on the Instagram page and tried to be as relatable as possible to the other students. And because we were students who'd already completed these modules, for example, I'd done the data analysis module the year before, we thought it would be helpful for other students to hear our advice and our thoughts to perhaps ease some anxieties around the modules, because they are quite technical and known to be quite difficult relative to other stuff. We also invited students to ask questions on our Instagram pages in the form of a Q&A, though this did eventually get transferred to an in-person PAL workshop. And there's also some feedback here from students, and the module felt like a community, which is something which we really tried to achieve when we were planning the project.
Thanks, Ryan. So how successful? Well, not bad. It's very Yorkshire to say that, but you have to know that economics students are generally not very keen on giving feedback, and the level of engagement is never up the roof. So the fact that we had actually that engagement with the social media channels, the views, the likes, and the then in-person workshops as well, also the relationship we had with the mentors was actually a very positive outcome, I think. We did conduct an evaluation of the project with interviews of the mentors, of students, of the module conveners, and of servers as well. And the feedback was overall positive, especially around that range of learning activities. So the fact that students had the choice to decide whether they wanted to engage with social media or not. I think the point is that nothing on the social media page was only there, so it was only a complement. So the core aspect of the curriculum was delivered still during the lectures or with institutional tools, and the social media was just there as an alternative, basically, of mode of learning. I don't know if you agree, Ryan, but I think it was quite a positive experience for the mentors as well.
Yes, definitely. It was also great to receive some of the content as well. I was a student who used the social media support for Econometrics too, and I found the content very helpful. It was definitely supporting of the lectures. It could never be a substitute, but it certainly supported the lectures. The posts were informative, very easy to digest. Like I said, the idea was to be very short and snappy and get the point across quickly. And it made revision a little bit more time efficient, and I didn't necessarily have to watch the lectures back.
Right, that's the bell for last order there. So I'll finish there. I think you can't please everyone, and we have feedback from students saying, you know, I'm not on social media to work on my econometrics, so please leave me alone, which is fair enough. And I think that's a question you can, you know, discuss a bit further, how much you want to get into their world. But the main takeaway really is just try something new. As I said, I'm not a social media user at all, but I thought maybe it was something to try to get some engagement, and I think these initiatives are well received by students somehow. We found that Instagram was better than TikTok. Ryan can discuss that a bit more, but it just creates a community of followers, and it's more targeted way of providing that support. And we'll continue the project with maybe a few things that we've learned, but overall it was a pretty positive experience, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Perfect on the timing. Thank you both very much. Now, what we'll do, there'll be lots of things to discuss. There's already some questions and comments in the chat, so you might have a look at that. And then after we've had the three speakers speak, we've then got open discussion time where we can pick up some of the other comments. So thank you very much for that to Mathilde and to Ryan. I'll pass over to Teresa now. Oh, if you want to stop sharing your screen, Mathilde, and then I think Sue will start hers. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to introduce somebody who was very influential to me when I first arrived in Twitter in 2009. And I've just checked Sue's profile. She also arrived in 2009. So literally months before me, when I was exploring the possibilities really of using social media to connect students through virtual exchange. I bumped into Sue, and here was somebody who was helpful and who was talking about things that were very relevant and interesting to me. So she was a very early follower and a tweep who I didn't even meet in person until a few years later at the Association for Learning Technology. But since then, I'm delighted to say we've met many times, and we've worked together either virtually or often via Twitter or sometimes in person. And she's an absolute delight. She's a go-to person when it comes to anything technical, but certainly social media use, and the involvement in the learning, the LTHE chat that I now have really comes down to Sue. So I'm really grateful, Sue, that you're with us today. Thank you for joining us.
We can't hear you.
You're muted, Sue.
Still not hearing anything
Right,
at the moment.
we're just going to have to find your audio at the moment. I had hearing difficulties as a child and I learned to lip read, but I don't think I can do it that well. So yes, you're
Sorry
my-
about that.
That's all right.
perfect. Thank
You're
you.
there now.
We have you.
Okay.
Wonderful.
You think we know how to do this by now, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So we've got full screen showing there. Is that?
Yep.
that
Yep. Ready
okay?
to go then. Okay.
Lovely. Okay, so I'm going to look at the perspective of using social media for professional development and thinking about the development of a personal learning network. You may have come across the term PLN. So that's what I'm going to have a look at. So for some reason I can't move my slides on. It's not my day today, is it?
It's saying resume slideshow, so not sure why.
There we go. Right, okie dokie. So I'm going to look at ways where I've created my personal learning network using a variety of different social media, and also draw upon the weekly learning teaching in higher education Twitter chats as part of that. So looking back, I can remember vividly this diagram that was created as part of Alex Corris's PhD, in actual fact, and then he published a chapter in 2010, this idea of the networked teacher and the variety of different tools that you could engage with. And what I started to do was to experiment with the different types of social media. And I think one thing that's important for anybody engaging as a new user of social media is to try one tool at a time and then see who you can connect with and see if that works for you, because your personal learning network and the community that you build within that is totally personal. So what I can suggest you use might not necessarily be the best thing for you as an individual, but it could be. So these are a variety of different tools that most of them have stood the test of time. WordPress is an example of a blogging tool. There are, of course, others. So what I started to do was observe other people's use of social media. And as I started to build my connections, Twitter was quite powerful, and I could look at who other people were connected with. That built my network externally outside of my university and even outside of the UK. So I started to make connections internationally. So I then, when I was looking at people attending conferences, speaking at conferences, realized that they were sharing their presentations through SlideShare, which then could be put onto your LinkedIn profile. People might have been recorded and their presentations be put onto YouTube. They could then be tweeted. So there was these various different mediums and the conversations going around the particular presentations being shared. So I learned a lot from observing people and then started to look at how I could actually put that into practice myself. So one of my earlier examples was actually being invited to do a talk about social media for employability at my own institution. And I put that onto SlideShare and I tweeted it. And that was picked up by the organizer of FOTI, which is the Future of Technology in Education in London, a really good conference. Unfortunately, it doesn't run anymore now. The organizer's gone to Germany, unfortunately, but it was a really good conference. And I was invited to give a keynote to expand on the topic that I talked about in my SlideShare that's on the left-hand side. Later that year, well, in May, actually, that year, I was following the CEDAR conference and there was about half a dozen people tweeting, which was quite a new thing at that point, sort of bringing out little highlights of presentations. And David was actually at the conference, and following this event, we said, how about we plan a session about using social media, because it would actually be good to have more people tweeting at conferences so that people that couldn't make it could actually take part in that as well, if slightly differently and remotely. So we planned our conference presentation without having met in person before. We did it all through social media, through private Twitter DMs and Google Slides, and then met for the first time to actually present that, which went down very well at the time. So that's how it kind of progressed for me using these different channels. I also followed and engaged in a lot of American tweet chats. So EdChats was quite popular. And then both myself and David Hopkins, we presented a tweet chats at an online event, and then incorporated it into something we call Bring Your Own Devices for Learning, which I co-led with Christina Rancy and had other people facilitating as well. And then we came up with the idea that actually, how about taking this concept of using the tweet chat to having a weekly chat? So we'd started that in 2014, thinking we'll start it as a little trial, see how it goes until Christmas and see what happens. And essentially what a tweet chat is, for the benefit of anybody that hasn't experienced it, is you pose roughly about 6 questions. So you can have one every 10 minutes and you put a Q in front of the question and people put A and the answer to the question. And as long as you've got a hashtag, which our hashtag was LTHE chat, people can search for that hashtag and then see all the tweets that contain that hashtag and engage in what's quite a fast and furious conversation, but very, very interesting. So it takes place every Wednesday, 8 till 9, apart from Easter and Christmas holidays, and we take a little break for summer. A year or so into having the chats, Advance HE, originally HE Chat, actually, when they were Higher Education Academy, said that they would like to do a chat as well. So they have the last Wednesday every month, and we have a combined hashtag so that both people that are not familiar with LTHE Chat but know about Advanced HE can engage. So far, there's been 248 LTHE chats, and each week a guest volunteers to suggest a topic. And they come up with their 6 questions and write a blog post. And sometimes that's a really nice way for them to promote the things that they're researching and working on and they've got expertise in. So that can be part of the blog post. What we would then do, the organisers would then curate the tweets. And initially we used something called Storyfy. Storyfy fortunately decided that they wanted to go to behind a paywall. Luckily for us, Wakelet came onto the horizon and they were really helpful in transferring all of our tweet chats across to Wakelet. But essentially that gives you a little storyboard with all of the tweets, and people can read that later. So the model that we organise now is that we have 3 volunteers each semester. One of those will be a mentor, so they might have been a volunteer in the past. And I kind of take a little bit of a back seat now and just sort of, I'm kind of the guide on the side and there to help if needed. And what we've also incorporated when Chrissy Naranci, David Walker and Peter Reid were part of it was this scheme of badges. So people can actually choose to download a badge if they've engaged with the CPD. There's one for the volunteers, there's ones for the guests and mentors. And then there's also the Golden Tweeter Award, which Teresa McKinnon is a recipient of, having been very much engaged in the Twitter chat for many years. So what I really wanted to show you next is what some of those people that have been part of the organising team, because I say they volunteer to, gather the tweets, to set those up, to schedule them, to write the blogs, and to help with the sort of behind the scenes sort of things, what they've said, and also some of the participants. So I've drawn on both of those groups of people. So Suzanne Faulkner said, it's given me a fantastic opportunity to expand and develop my personal learning network. It's challenged me to consider what I do and, more importantly, why. She's also been part of the organising team, and that's helped to learn new technical and organisational skills. Professor Phil Race, some of you may know him, so the community of practice has given me an opportunity to interact with many people in the UK and globally, and leads me to really useful resources. Debbie, who's been a participant today, she gave this quote, and she says, taking part in this has been instrumental in my professional development, and it's enabled her to connect with and meet new people. Danielle Hinton said, it means everything. It's a pedagogical lifeline, an awesome community, and inspiration in a friendship place. Dawn said that it had actually contributed to her own CPD, and she included a paragraph about the chat because she was a mentor to the team, a part of the organising team twice, and she used that in her NTF application. And Professor Sally Brown said, interacting with LTHE chat has helped me meet and work with many people I would not otherwise have encountered. So some really nice feedback from the people that have been part of the community that I hope gives you sort of an insight of how that's contributed to their CPD, continuous professional development. And then there's a few more quotes here. Simon Lancaster said, it's been my counsel, my conscience, my community. And Q Sum, who was actually a student initially, she's just got her first lecturer role, but she was part of this throughout taking a PhD, and that's helped her develop a network and a passion for learning and teaching, which is why she's now gone into a teaching role, which is really good to hear. And then the last couple of things I really wanted to show you were other opportunities for learning more about social media. So in December at the University of Northampton, the 8th Social Media for Learning in Higher Education conference is taking place. It's quite a reasonable price. It's just a day conference, and I highly recommend that. There's a lot of different presentations looking at how social media is used in learning and teaching. And for those aspiring to look at what they're actually doing themselves, there's the Journal of Social Media for Learning, which Dawn Irving Bell was the key person that set that going, and there's quite a few of us have been involved in that, so that's worth looking at. It's there's lots of different ways you can, it's not just research, it can be case studies, reviews, different types of things that can go into this journal, which is nice for people getting onto the ladder of publishing some of the work that they're doing. And finally, the other thing that is also Dawn Irving Bell is the National Teaching Repository. There's a whole host of various resources, teaching resources. Some of those aren't related to social media for learning, so there's all sorts of different topics, but there are quite a lot of examples in there, and it's a really nice space to showcase your own work, so that other people can see it. And you know, I think that's the essence really for me of social media. It's the fact that it's open, it's a way to share what goes well, but also to talk about the things that perhaps don't go so well, and to seek advice from others who might have new ideas or alternatives. And that's the end of the presentation, so I'll stop sharing there.
Again, thank you very much. Excellent timing. Got us bang on time, and loads of good links. There were a couple of links that on that, I think, second to last slide. So where I was going to see if I could kind of copy them off, but I couldn't. But if you could add those, perhaps drop those into the chat as our next speakers get going, that would be great. And then there'll be lots of things for people to follow up in the discussion bit. But before the discussion bit, I'm going to hand over to Rosemary, who's going to introduce Chris. So over to you, Rosemary.
Thanks, Alistair. So it is my very great pleasure to introduce our final speaker for today. Chris Heaney is the programme leader for the BA in Outdoor Education and Outdoor Learning at Perth College, University of Highlands and Islands. And he neatly, I think we'd planned it, is going to bring it together from talking about how his students and his programme make use of social media, particularly to connect with professional learning networks outside of the university, and other examples of how they are using social media within the programme. So Chris, if you want to switch on your camera and start your screen sharing, fabulous. Then if you're all ready, I will hand over to you.
Hi folks, this is Perth calling. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Well done.
Oh, thank you. As Rosemary said, folks, Chris Heaney, I am the programme leader for the BA Honours Outdoor Education and Learning here, based here at Perth, but also with our partner college at Inverness.
I think we've lost your audio.
Sorry, my computer wasn't cooperating.
Okay.
So over the next 10 minutes, I'll talk a little bit about my own pedagogical and programme leadership philosophy, having arrived at Perth, or certainly taken on the programme leadership at Perth, and while the world was going through a fairly challenging situation, and certainly our course was going through a fairly challenging situation at the same time. I want to refer to the What Works report, which was published by the Paul Hamlyn Foundation back in 2012, which had a significant impact on not only my own philosophy, but also the practice that we've implemented here. It sets to create a strong sense of community within the outdoor education students, and how we've used social media. And I'm certainly not suggesting that we have it dialed in. Some of the stuff that Rosemary alluded to there, it's stuff that we're still working on. Before the presentation started, some of the folks were talking about the use of LinkedIn, and a fellow colleague using LinkedIn as a tool for students to leave their program of study, having already established their professional network using the LinkedIn social tool. So without further ado, I took on the programme leadership role at Perth in September 21. Now, social restrictions had greatly eased by then, but college restrictions were still very robust, including, frustratingly for our students as well as our staff team, that there was no blended or practical learning for outdoor education degree students. And as such, because students had already had a significant period of time with the restrictions that we all experienced, retention and achievement was suffering significantly. Taking on the PL role, that presented an immediate challenge in terms of delivering on our not only on our curriculum, but on our moral obligation to provide best quality experience to the students that we could, given the restrictions that we faced. So the first job I had was really tackling that level of withdrawal. Lots of students across a variety of outdoor education courses, and I speak not only for UHI, but colleagues in the south of England, where I'd worked previously, reported that through the pandemic, a significant number of students had decided that because their outdoor education degree programme had very little, if in fact any, outdoor education, they were voting with their feet and moving on to take on roles within the sector, which by that point, I have to say, was booming, and organisations couldn't staff their level of provision because we were faced with this outdoor zeitgeist where everybody, having been locked in for significant periods of time, was desperate to get out and take advantage of being in the mountains, on the seas, and on rivers. So there was an abundance of job opportunities. So I needed to come up with a solution for that, and it struck me that a report that I first came across in 2012 when I was working down south, a report that focused exclusively, I have to say, on student success in English universities rather than north of the border. Came up with a variety of guidance that really resonated with my own sort of pedagogical philosophies. Before coming here, I taught on other outdoor and adventure education programs, specifically in an adventure sports coaching context, and it's that relational aspect of the coaching relationship that helped me and informed the steps that I decided to take. Outdoor and adventure education, though not exclusively, does focus heavily on the development of inter and intrapersonal relationships, using the medium of the natural environment, outdoor activities in a broad sense, from arts to crafts to bushcraft, through to traditional journeying mechanisms of outdoor pursuits and more contemporary adventure sports. As educators of both pedagogy and leadership, I felt it was important that we modelled behaviours that were synonymous with that good learning and teaching approach. And while neo-Hahnian, so post-Kurt Hahn, if anybody's familiar with Kurt Hahn, has come under scrutiny in recent years, I certainly still like Hahn's 5 pillars of outward bound, which indicate that, well, I'll not run through them all, but the last line of the section in the text states, above all, compassion. And I felt it was important, while people were being frustrated by their university experience and occasionally with each other, that we found ways of bringing people together and fostering this sense of compassion. Thank you. So the What Works report effectively proposed strategies to enhance not only student engagement, but that sense of belonging once a young or not so young person arrives at an institution of higher education, and identified that success in our field means helping all of the students to become more engaged and more effective learners in higher education, thus improving their academic outcomes and their progression opportunities. And it was that really resonated with me, given the experience I was witnessing of lots of our students that were exiting stage left. Now, it has to be said that much of the research and the funding mechanisms based around student choice at the time of this were focused heavily on creating a more competitive HE marketplace. And when students leave home for university, they embark on a new chapter of their lives, an adventure in its own right. And while certainly south of the border, institutions were looking at enhancing their competitiveness, I felt our end goal was to teach, coach, counsel, and mentor our learners towards independence. And that we saw that as an endpoint, not as a start as we mean to go on approach. We're all mindful of the levels of mental health challenge that lots of our learners faced throughout the pandemic. And given that we had students arriving with a very different set of qualities and challenges at that time, that coaching approach that I referred to earlier really seemed to be paramount to what we did. So I should make it clear that we recognise that students are very much on their own journey, and while our coaching hat goes on periodically, that our students are very much on their own journey. They have the control of their own social media and group platforms. I see our role as being supportive, not spoon feeding the students, or unless that's what they need, of course. Going back to that individualized approach. There are, of course, other UHI mechanisms that help with some of the more pastoral type roles, but I felt that our role was to engage students as best we could, but both before they arrive with us and when they arrive with us. So we use Instagram and Facebook primarily. The guidance I received was that Facebook was for people who were more my generation, and Instagram was for the target audience of students that tend to come through our door. So I wanted to enable them to see what we do in terms of our day-to-day curriculum, our residentials and expeditions that we include in the programme, and other theory to practice components. Students report to us now that as at the applicant phase, this gave them a real sense of the community in which they would be entering in, and it gave them a direct line to colleagues here. They got to see us as real people. And we're able to, or more comfortable in contacting us as a result. The social media that we use once they're students embeds them within the experience. It adds to their timeline of university life, and they both take our content and they contribute content to our groups. Our engagement platforms include a Facebook page and an Instagram page, but we also have a private space for students that students use to both share and take some of that social media. And I suppose it works as a soft marketing tool in some sense, because they're sharing that content all of the time. So yeah, in terms of creating that community, we use the social media to engage students within residentials, events that would perhaps be ignored if it was part of a college-wide group email. But this semester alone, we've had students to a climbing event. Last week we hosted a national film festival, and students were involved as helpers as well as participants. And this is all shared by our social media platforms. Job links, volunteering opportunities. And I suppose the most telling aspect is the sense of community and the feedback that we get from students in terms of how connected they feel as a group and excuse me, and how connected they feel to the program. The What Works report goes on to state that students who didn't think, who it never became an issue to, that they would continue on their course, not only have a better understanding of the institution and the processes, but we're also more likely to report a positive relationship, not only with students, but also with the staff that work with them as well. And that's what we aspire to achieve here. So, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. And those links, are those links that anybody can go to and have a look at? Or?
Yeah, they're on the presentation.
Yep.
Slides.
There's one which is a private group, and that is the space for students to post as well as receive some of the content, both media and theoretical stuff, but yeah, all of the rest are available, and the What Works report is there as well.
Smashing. Thank you very much. So now we go to our kind of free-form discussion time, where we can take some of the discussion that's been going on in the text chat, some of the questions in the text chat. We can bring these out into the live audience. So Lillian, Rosemary, Teresa, Ron, any specific threads that we ought to catch up on?
I think some people were quite keen to get like lessons learned from like Matilda and Ryan. It's like some key things about what you would do differently. And this is quite a short webinar. So what we will say is that we're planning to kind of create the case study and make that available through the Royal Society for Economics website and the teaching economics websites and things like that. But yeah, I think, you know, feel free to connect. Mathilde, did we have your email address on the slides? I can't remember if we did.
Yes, on the last slide. Yeah.
Okay, so
Feel
on
free
the
to go
last
back,
slide,
yeah.
if you want to get in touch with Mathilde and ask her any specific questions as well, there's capacity for you to do that. And some of the other key questions, I think Ryan did answer. Thank you, Ryan, in the chat. Mike was prompting this question about the limit of character limits on social media. You know, is that a hindrance or is that a benefit? I think some of us, if you remember, Mike, we did the webinar on writing, and we had, was it Sue who talked about
Laura Gibbs.
Laura Gibbs
Yeah.
about tiny stories.
Yeah.
And we all concluded that actually it can be a really good way in. And I guess what Ryan was saying as well was that, you know, the succinct nature of some of the videos was helpful. So in the same way, possibly the writing could be helpful if it's shorter.
Yeah, I think it's, sorry, Lillian, I think it's really worth emphasizing that constraints issue. And Matthew also in the chat pointed out that, you know, when we're live tweeting during the session, we're not putting alt text on the images. Apologies for that. It's my fingers.
It was
are so
you.
cold.
It was
It
you.
was me. I just can't do it quickly enough. But I would emphasize that actually, and I'm sure Sue has experienced this, the importance of the immediacy of social media is that we react quickly and we pick things up quickly and we do things on the moment. So the live tweeting is very much about pointing people towards the Xerte resource. So constraints are not necessarily a bad thing. Constraints can actually make things more powerful.
It was interesting looking at some of the comments about the LTHE chat, and I think it might have been Phil or somebody had said that I find it hard keeping up. And apologies if it wasn't Phil that said that, but there is an element there that's interesting because where something is live, for people who are perhaps slower at processing that, or you know, slower at actually typing, that can be an issue, and you can end up being disconnected from some of the thread. I don't know whether people have experience of that being a bad thing or something that is off-putting, or is it just one of those things you live with?
I can step in and answer that. I think I think there's scope for both, really. You know, just sort of focusing on the LTHE chat, which is, you know, very time constrained in the hour.
Yeah.
But we have had people that have joined the chat later on in the evening, and the conversation continues until the next morning because people will come back into the threads and answer those. And there's never anybody saying, you know, well, that finished hours ago. What, you know, what are you talking about this for now? Because that's not what it's like. So, you know, I think it's got advantages for both because you can, you know, take your time to answer questions, which I think is important for a lot of people. You know, they want to think about things. I certainly have a better answer, whereas if you were face to face in a, you know, or even online having a webinar, somebody asks you a question, you know, if you don't answer within a few seconds, you know, there's that you know, emptiness of not doing so. So it can help people a lot, I think, to
and I think that's a really powerful point, Sue, as well. I've never really thought about it like that before, that in that face-to-face discussion, you don't have the luxury of being able to just be quiet and think about it for 20 minutes. But it's a really important point, so and needs to be balanced. Yeah, good point.
And also, I think I've made mention before that social media won't be the last bit of different communication we're going to experience in our lives. There's going to be lots of other things in the future, from implants to I don't know what else, right? But all the technology that we have, from paper and phone calls and VLE sites, etc. They're all on a kind of spectrum, on a kind of timeline, and a spectrum of usability, functionality, you know, and it's a tool set, isn't it, for communication and the right thing at the right time. And I personally want to kind of make mention, because we are talking about inclusiveness with technology, that for me personally, as someone who used to tweet a lot and be really in the thick of things, I've actually found myself stepping back a little bit more from a kind of mental health point of view. And when I do dip into Twitter now that I have a strategy for managing it, because I used to turn it on and have the anxiety level go way up. Like you say, it was like, if you didn't react instantly, you felt disappointed in yourself, or you felt that shot of anxiety. And what I've learned to do is, if I do turn on my Twitter, I just look at 3 tweets and I close it. I do the same with my Facebook. I look at Facebook, I look at 3 posts and I turn it off. And I have this kind of knowing yourself and what you're like with social media. You know, having that relationship with social media is something to be careful of, I think. You know, people who are talking about safeguarding or distractions caused by social media, that's something that's kind of a skill to learn as well, a life skill to learn.
Can I come back to Chris? Chris, one of the points you made, you had that, what I thought was a very helpful quote. Students who did not think about leaving appear to have a better understanding of the university processes, etc. So how clearly do you think that was linked to having those social media, you know, the Instagram and the Facebook? Was there a clear connection there, or was it a correlation?
The way I saw it, Alistair, was that even last academic year, a significant number of our students continued to not see the inside of the building here. They were physically and emotionally and psychologically detached from the institution. So creating the social media content and linking them to it not only allowed us to connect with them in some ways, and when other students, because unfortunately it was only our degree students that weren't allowed to be doing practical stuff. I suppose there was a double-edged sword in that, seeing other folks out and active probably rubbed a little bit of salt in the, but it allowed us to create opportunities and connections with other happenings, be it connections with clubs or volunteering options. We could get them engaged in related activity that wasn't directly a consequence of the university program, and therefore subject to the restrictions. So we could highlight opportunities, and they could interact with each other as well more easily.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's really helpful. I think, Ron, do you want to? I can almost read Ron's mind about, before we hit the magic hour of 2 o'clock. Do you want to say your bit, and then we can continue the conversation?
I don't think we need to share the screen again, Alistair, but I put a link in the text chat to register for the next session, which is also where all of our resources are available. And also a reminder that if people can, before they leave, just post what one thing you will do as a result of what you've seen and heard today, or a specific comment on something that you might do as a result.
I've just seen Mike Wall's comment about restricting face-to-face spoken conversations to a spoken equivalent of 140 characters. That's something I'd love to take away. That's brilliant.
I'm quite sure Alistair and I would enjoy a day talking in haikus, actually, because I went through almost the best part of a year following up with Alistair's haikus in the morning with my own that I was doing in another community. And I found it quite cathartic, and also it's like writing short small stories or summarizing key points, so it can provide some clarity for your learners if you're asking them to kind of compose something about today's lesson in the shortest possible form, you know, and contribute that. So it can be a form of learning to enjoy the constraints of a medium, communication medium. So on that note, I am actually going to stop recording.